Welcome to the Catalyst of Change, Advancing Equity and Inclusion in Science. This seminar is in English with interpretation available in Spanish, French, and Hindi. You may select the language of your preference at the Zoom bar menu. This seminar will be recorded and made available on the CIMMYT YouTube channel. We will be hearing today from a leader in intelligent decision support system, Dr. Suzanne Pierce. Dr. Pierce is a research scientist and manager for the Decision Support Office at the Texas Advanced Computer Center. Dr. Pierce will have a conversation with Dr. Michael Euler, agriculture and research economist at CIMMYT. We invite you to submit your questions and comments on the Slido tool to be addressed in the Q&A session right after the conversation. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Brian Goberts, Director General of CIMMYT, to officially open the event and introduce our distinguished speaker of today, Dr. Suzanne Pierce. Dr. Goberts, over to you.
Thank you, Isabel, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Once again, welcome to Catalyst of Change, Women Leaders in Science. And I must say, this is our second seminar with a bit of a changed format. Today, we will hear from a women catalyst and from a man champion on women catalysts of change. Because the purpose of Catalyst of Change seminars is to showcase leaders who are advancing equity and inclusion in their organizations and communities. In this series, we highlight diverse ranges of leaders, change makers, and allies of women in underrepresented geographies and ethnicities, differently abled people, indigenous communities, and other often unheard voices in agriculture, science, and development. Equity and inclusion in leadership are essential to build effective, ethical, and future-ready organizations that take into account the strength of what we all have to offer as a global community. By highlighting diverse leaders, we put equity and inclusion at the center of leadership, and we aim to provide role models and improve our own institutional leadership, always with the end in mind, the impact for farmers and farm communities out there. This is about optimizing our theory of change. This is about making sure that we can identify those bottlenecks, those showstoppers that does not allow agri-food systems to transform in the sustainable and resilient reality we want them to be. We need to bring, therefore, people with different experiences and worldviews together. Because if CIMMYT is to serve the global community, we have to understand the worldviews into decision-making, which results in more innovative solutions, greater abilities to anticipate risks and unintended consequences, and better representation of stakeholder needs. We have invited CEOs, ambassadors, and world-renowned scientists, as well as local leaders from the different communities in the field, in their family, to speak at Catalyst of Change. Young professionals, representatives of indigenous communities, science communicators, human resource professionals, project managers, and differently abled professionals, all of those under one common tagline, driving our mission forward in the most optimal way. We therefore now have a new tagline, and that tagline is there thanks to you, our thoughtful audience. You gave us feedback, we listened, and we changed. Today, we have women and men that can be leaders in advancing gender equity and inclusion, advancing that theory of change. And we heard you and we agree. Thank you for engaging with us and for the continuing to provide ideas, comments, and questions for this series. Today, we have a true catalyst of change, Suzanne Pierce, who is a research scientist with the Texas Advanced Computing Center and Environmental Science Institute at Jackson School for Geosciences. Pierce leads a National Science Foundation-funded community of researchers that use intelligent systems to understand Earth, including water, energy, urbanization, ecosystems. Results from her research have actually developed tools and techniques that aid integrated modeling and group decision support. She has received awards both locally and internationally for being innovative and engaging. Pierce obtained her Ph.D. in Geosciences from the University of Texas at Austin and a bachelor on Geology of the University of Arkansas. Pierce will have a conversation with our own Michael Erler, who's an agriculture and research economist who analyzes the diffusion and impacts of agricultural innovations on smallholder farms and looks at bottlenecks to improve that diffusion and that impact that we are all striving for. Before joining CIMMYT in June 2021, Michael was with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the German Institute for Development Evaluation and Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, or GIZ. Michael holds a Ph.D. in agricultural economics and an MSc in agriculture science from the University of Göttingen, Germany. Results of his research and evaluation work has been published in multiple peer-reviewed academic journals and evaluation reports, and he is, of course, an esteemed member of CIMMYT's Upcoming Talent, or ETLG, Emerging Thought Leader Group, as well as part of the Paula Cantor Center. Therefore, without further ado, please welcome our two catalysts of change for a conversation, not before listening to Suzanne's life story up to now. Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so much for the invitation today. I'm very pleased to be here and looking forward to the conversation. I'm not quite sure how I got here. In some senses, I arrived through the lens of authenticity, and that really has been the guiding practice and goal of everything that I've done. So starting very, very young, I followed intuition because I knew that I wanted to learn other languages. I knew that I wanted to live outside of the United States, and I was driven to see changes in the world that would lead us to more sustainable practices. And kind of through that process of finding myself, I've found a pathway that I'm really happy with in terms of a career and kind of the resulting arena where I am. So I guess one of the best starting points for me is I have an advanced degree in geosciences, but it was an integrated degree. It was one of the first, what they call a portfolio degree, where the student is allowed to frame their own design plan. And so my degree program pulled from 5 different degree areas, domain areas. It pulled from decision support, so technology applications with a business-centric function to help people make smarter decisions based on data and information. A geosciences degree with a specialization in groundwater sciences, and that really was my core degree. And that was because I was interested in understanding the Earth. I wanted to understand how the Earth worked. What were the parts of the Earth systems that we can't see, that are invisible to the eye, that you can only understand through investigation that uses tools and techniques that help to kind of unravel and open up the mysteries of what's inside and what's happening beneath our feet. So I thought that was really fascinating. And then the third piece that was really important was learning how to actually work with people so that I could understand the problems that they're confronting and how you use Earth's resources and nature-based solutions to try to move forward in ways that optimize or maximize and improve to achieve the most satisfying outcomes. So what are the solutions that best serve the greatest number of people? And to do that, you need advanced math. So operations research, which is kind of adjacent to business and IT, but operations research became a really important component of what I do, which is data fusion through meta-heuristic optimization. And so it starts for me with trying to find myself when I was much younger, and starting school very young as an environmental scientist, thinking that I was on a track. And early on, some adversity hits, and in kind of every important chapter and moment in my life, adversity strikes, and it's through finding my pathway out of that adverse situation and adapting my approach or finding a new way to continue towards the goal that I've had the greatest growth and the greatest outcomes. And so early in college, my family, I grew up on a ranch in the United States in Colorado, in the most remote corner of Colorado. Steamboat Springs is the town. It's a little ski town, and it's ranchers and skiers there. My family would winter ranch in the ski town. So we had snow, we had workhorses, there were lots of athletic. It was an athletic community, it was an active community. And then in the summers, after all the social activities of the winter, we would go to a tiny little town called Yampa in Colorado that had no phone and no TV and nothing really for a 14-year-old girl or a 15-year-old girl to do. And so I went from highly social activities during the winter to complete isolation in the summers, and would get really frustrated and told my mother, I don't have anything to do. And so she said, well, just go outside and figure it out. And so I started by finding a point on a horizon and hiking to that point on the horizon to find out what was there. And that became my daily practice. And in hindsight, I look back at the time, I thought it was just terrible. And just, as a teenager, I thought this was just the absolute worst situation I could be in. And now in hindsight, I look back and realize it's what inspired me to probably become a geologist. It's why I do what I do. And it's that connection to the land that's really important for kind of driving my own vision forward, was just to try to find ways that people can interact with the land around us in more sustainable ways, and just moving forward. So coming to the problem set through embodied experience is part of what that is. And when I got my degree, I kind of combined all of the pieces together. The title of my thesis for my doctoral work, I think kind of says it all. It's, I built a groundwater decision support system that linked causal narratives. So that means I talked to humans, and used numerical models. So I used the best science and simulation tools available, with combinatorial search techniques. So I used a mathematic combinatorial search, which is a meta-heuristic that's based on optimization research. And I always call it Google for groundwater, because you can search for solutions, but they're based in the math of the problem, and it can find and suggest and recommend possible ways that you can manage your groundwater system. And then seeking the optimal extraction practices. So the optimization problem was looking for how to optimize sustainable yield for the groundwater systems for whatever the uses, whether that's for agriculture or urban populations or a domestic home, but kind of finding the path through preserving the water resource in a way that we can both interact and use it, but also benefit from its existence, and make sure that we don't draw down the aquifer to system collapse for the environmental systems around us. And so really that's my work, is looking at the intersection of those elements and trying to do that in ways that bring multiple perspectives, that's people-centered. So while the technology is really key, my aim and the method centers what people need first, and then adapts the technology and the tools around it. And from that ranch in Colorado, I had to find a path into a college program. And this was in the early 90s and very late 80s. And my family, ranching was not a great business in the United States at that time. And my family's business went bankrupt after my first year of college. And so I found that I had to find a new path. And so I had to drop out of the private school that I was going to, the private university, and figure out where to go. And so there was a public university that I could get in-state tuition. It was University of Arkansas. So I moved across the country to go to University of Arkansas. And there I lived with my grandparents for a period of time, and was fortunate to have that family support, and had to figure out how to pay for that college. And so that led me to, I ended up making Bluebirds of Happiness. So I needed to go to school full time. Whoops, sorry, I'm having a hard time with the camera, but this is one of the Bluebirds of Happiness that I made to put myself through school. And so I became a glass blower because I could make money. I could work from 11 p.m. at night to 7 a.m. in the morning, and I got paid for every bluebird. And so I could control how much money I made as long as my body could sustain the activity. And then during the day, I was free to go to classes. And it was a weird solution, but it worked out really well. I was able to quickly save up enough money to move into my own apartment, to go to school, to complete my geology degree. And in between, I kind of forgot to mention when I had to pivot after my family's challenge and hard times, I knew that I wanted to learn a second language. And so I also saved up just enough money before going back to school in Arkansas. I saved up just enough money to buy a tent and a ticket to Spain. And I went and got a job at a summer camp and backpacked around for about a month or two. I ended up living in Spain for 6 months and learning Spanish. And that ended up being a really unique and important part of what happened next, because I became fluent enough in Spanish, and I went back home and went to school, found my path to go through school, and made Bluebirds of Happiness to do it, which was hard, but really fortunate. There was a lot of fortune in the hardship, like finding those paths and developing a craft skill that I'm really proud of today. It's as I'm nearing retirement, I am back to glass blowing for fun, and I love it. And so from there, I finished my degree in geosciences and was looking for jobs. And by happenstance, I went back to Colorado. My mother had opened up a dress store for women's clothing, and we were all required to, all of my, there were 4 kids in my family. So all of the kids were required to be in my mom's store on Christmas Eve and help wrap Christmas packages. And so it was 7 p.m. on Christmas Eve after I just graduated with my degree in geosciences and thought that I was going to be working in the United States. And this man came into the store, my mother's store, and it was super late. And I said to him, "Why are you so late?" It's this tiny town. So as he came in, he said to my mom, "Betty, I need a gift for Kathy, his wife." And my mom said, "I've got you. I know what to do." And she ran off and she was picking out things for his wife's present and presenting them to him. And so when he got to the front and it was late and it was Christmas Eve again, I just kind of was ready for the evening to start and the celebrations to begin. And so I said, "Gosh, you're here awfully late, and it's kind of, a shame that you're so late to pick up your wife's present." And he said, "Well, I just got off a flight from Santiago, Chile, and I didn't have time to buy anything in the country. I was coming from the back fields, and so I'm here now." And I said, "Oh my gosh, I've always wanted to go to the Andes. I've always wanted to see wild llamas, and I speak Spanish fluently. And I just finished my degree in geology, and I just love the mountains. And I'm a specialist in groundwater sciences, and I can't wait to get to work. I want to go out and work on drill rigs." And his eyes kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I didn't know why. But he handed me his business card and said, "I would really like to talk to you more." And then out the door he went. And I thought nothing of it. And then 2 days later, when it was Boxing Day, his wife, actually Kathy, called my mother and said, "Betty," to my mom, "my husband would really like to talk to your daughter." And what I didn't know was he was the owner for Terra Matrix Consulting, which is now part of Montgomery Watson Harza, for those of you who know the larger kind of development consulting companies that work in a lot of environmental mining kinds of activities. So he was the owner of this consulting company, and he had just come from a high altitude gold mine in the Andes with his groundwater scientist. And on the flight back, they were saying, "Where on earth are we going to find someone who speaks Spanish, is a groundwater scientist, and actually wants to go to South America?" And he met me. And the short version is 2 weeks later, I was on the ground in the Andes, working in a high altitude gold mine with herds of wild llamas everywhere. And I absolutely had fallen in love with my career, and that was really the kickoff for the career. And in that process, it was a very large gold mine that was aligning with all of the best environmental practices of the day. This is 1995. And in that process, I was going out to the farthest reaches of the mine site to try and get a secure water supply line drilled for the mining operations. And then also checking all of the environmental water quality wells to make sure that we were complying. And the construction crews were leaving a mess in the valleys where the llamas were. And I felt that that was inappropriate. So I went to the mine manager and told him that they needed to clean up that situation. And he said, if you think it's important, give me a plan and tell me how you would clean it up. So I came back to him, put together a plan, told him how many, what kinds of vehicles I would need, what kind of materials I would need, and how many people I would need in a crew to go out and clean up the environmental area that was in the valley there. And so that was my first environmental project. And you get a reputation very quickly in that arena. I was the only woman. There were about 1,500. It was a 1,500 person man camp at altitude. It was at 14,000 feet of elevation. It was very, remote, very rugged. And there were 4 administrative assistants that stayed in a mine office, but I was the only woman who was actually going out into the field and working in the field with all of the miners and the construction development folks. And that turned out to be a good thing because after I cleaned up the Mangueras, the valley where we were working, I got a reputation, and that led to the next opportunity, which was a copper mine, which was the 7th largest copper mine in the world and the first joint collaboration between the Chilean government and the multinational agencies and companies in decades. They needed an environmental manager, and I was fortunate enough I got that position, and I was able to be the environmental manager for the El Abra mine site, which is in the Atacama Desert of Chile. And I lived there for about 5 years. And it was one of the best times of my life and informs everything that I do today. So my research today leads from all of that in the sense that while I was at the mine site in Chile, I learned that information was the most important tool at my control. I designed and deployed the auditing systems for environmental performance. I assisted with designing the archaeological recovery plan and mitigation plan and rescue plan for one of the most important mining sites that's pre-Incaica in South America. And I'm really proud that we were able to support that and find a pathway through that made sure it preserved the history and enabled the study of those sites. I got to permit one of the first toxic waste management sites in South America back in, again, 90s. And I'm very proud of that. We lined it, we managed it. We had to deal with quite a few toxic substances that otherwise might have just gone straight into the desert and ended up in the water. And I'm proud to say that we defined a path and protocols and permitted it and created practices that the mine site follows to this day to try and manage those and make sure that lead and heavy metal waste are managed properly. But through it all, the water was the most important thing. And so I developed a decision support system that would let people know when the Salar waters, the Playa Lake Basin where we got our water, when we were overpumping. And they'd just been managing it by gut until that moment. And so to actually build the decision support system that sent a warning and alerted them that they needed to back off on water use and adjust so that we could preserve. There was a flamingo feeding habitat. There were unique killifish that were, known across these Playa Lake basins and important components in the ecosystem there. And so just kind of making sure that we were protecting, and wild llamas, always the wild llamas, the Wanakos and the Vicuñas. So all of that informed when I came back to the university again. So when we returned to the United States after my 5 years, I knew that I wanted to study how information helped inform decisions. And so I started my doctoral work and thought that I was just going to do a research field science-based project, hopefully in a closed lake basin. I looked at Cuatro Ciénegas in Mexico to think about how management of water availability impacted dairy farming and agriculture in Mexico. But it was through the invitation of a colleague, of a faculty member at the time, I was still a student, to go to South America again, into the Atacama, and I helped lead the logistics for that project. And it was in that process that I told them about the mitigation program and decision support tool that I'd built while I was at the mine. And I convinced a team of 5 scientists, an international team, to drive 2 hours one way on terrible dirt roads out to this Playa Lake Basin, where I was going to show them the results of my information system that was helping to maintain the flow at a very important spring, a Vega site. When we drove up, rather than seeing the water flowing, I saw a dry Vega and felt like a gut punch had hit me, because all of my work and all of my effort at that mine site, of all of it, the pinnacle had been trying to preserve the flow at this one particular site by helping the miners better control their pumping. And so the realization that my information alone wasn't enough and the technology alone wasn't enough was another one of those bankrupting moments where you realize everything I've built my views on is wrong. Something's not right because it's not fully functioning. And so I had to adapt again. In terms of why all of this matters, it was like, I think that was the moment when I realized humans have to be at the center of everything. People have to be at the center. Our stories, our lived experiences, the motivations, and the things that matter to us most have to be connected back to the science and the information. And if we can't do that, we won't be able to inform the change that society needs at scale. So that is the greatest challenge, is this community-centered aspect of, we've got all of the technology. The technology is not really the solution, it's just a mechanism to help us make sense of the world around us. And so that when I do decision support work, it's more about the dialogue and the deliberation of the people in a room trying to decide how to use that information to choose a path and a next set of actions. And so while the research is called decision support, it's really dialogue support and figuring out how to make ways to scale that dialogue and translate it from one location to another location has been the crux of my research over time. And working through, physically difficult remote locations, resource intensive industries, male-dominated fields of science and engineering, living in remote conditions as one of the few women, within these man camps is kind of the way to describe them, was both it was just a boon and a blessing, but it was also a challenge. There were many times that I wanted to, change my course and do simpler things, and thought, why didn't I just take the easier path and stay in areas that were more common for someone like myself to be involved in. And instead I tackled a lot of different challenges. And today I'm happy to report we have figured out, my team just last week managed to, it took $2.5 million and 40 people 5 years to complete the decision support system that I built for my doctoral work. And I realized no small community is going to be able to do that, and they won't have the technical ability to replicate it, and they won't have the money. And so we've been working on creating a fully open source end-to-end decision support, composition, and orchestration infrastructure. And I'm really excited to say that we have managed to do that. You can gather field from sensors in the field. We can collect oral histories or lived experience or reports or ways that people communicate their information qualitatively. We can pull those all into a platform on our supercomputing services that are, again, open source and free, basically. Not free, somebody pays for the hardware to run, and that would be, at this point, the US government. But and then we analyze that information. So we do computational narrative analysis on the stories. We are pulling out of that what are the problem frames that matter most to people, and how do we connect those problem frames then into a model integration platform where we connect up the physics-based models. So imagine a hurricane is coming towards the coast of a country. We can connect the stories of how people have engaged with hurricanes in the past, understand what strategies worked for them that they told us through their own words, and then connect in the hurricane models variables that tell us both what people have experienced in previous hurricanes on the ground. So we use the human stories as part of the observation network for conditions on the ground, but then also understand how to communicate to people about the hurricane that's culturally relevant or matches up with criteria. There are best practices for communication that can look at turn around, don't drown is a common saying that you hear here in Texas, where I work currently, to try and prevent people from driving into floodwaters. But what recent communication studies have shown us, in a recent work that I completed with a colleague here at UT for the state of Texas, we realized for some of the groups that are at greatest risk, men typically between the ages of 18 and 28 or 30, their most valuable possession is usually their vehicle, their truck. And so telling them turn around, don't drown doesn't actually stop them from driving through a river or through a floodwater, but telling them protect your valuable property. They are motivated to protect their property. So we can give them maps and make those accessible to them. We can give them warnings about where the flooding is coming, but also the messaging back to them in terms that say, hey, if you drive into this water, you might lose your truck. That actually is likely to have greater impact by communicating to people in ways that are meaningful and acknowledge their values and the things that matter most to them in their life, rather than coming back and saying it's going to be, a 1 to 4 foot flood. You say, if you drive into this, you may lose your vehicle. And that communicates the same information, but in a way that they actually can act on it. I think I've talked too long and certainly have taken a winding course through this. The most important thing from my perspective now is finding ways to scale that we can get people's voices connected to our data and information, so we can present that data and information back to them, and so they can talk about what matters most for their communities, plan, prepare, and enact the best possible shared solutions available to us. And with that, I will pause and open it up for the next stage of this process.
Michael, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, Susan. Thank you indeed very much for sharing your inspiring story. I most enjoyed the part of your Christmas Eve job interview where the stars aligned. I think that's a very nice story. So my name is Michael Euler. I'm agricultural economist, and I'm connecting from our office in Ethiopia. So it's already late afternoon here. And I think in my work, I also try to understand the uptake of innovations, the impact of innovations in the agricultural sector, mostly on small scale farms. So it's also a bit about, why people take certain decisions and how can we kind of try to provide them a better evidence base to guide these decisions. So I think in this part, it's kind of similar what we're doing in principle, at least. So I'm very pleased that I was invited to interview you today. So we both work on enhancing evidence-based decision-making, I guess, but from different angles, right? You focus more on global issues, more on the earth science issues, whereas I and the team I work in, we focus more on people and on farms. And I also learned that the Texas Advanced Computing Center, you guys have one of the most advanced supercomputers on Earth that you probably use for your calculation. I mostly use my Lenovo ThinkPad that I have here at hand, so it's a slightly different level of complexity, I think. But you have more data to handle, I think. Yeah. So thanks again very much for being with us here today, and thanks for the opportunity to interview you. So I think you have many roles. I did a bit of research before today, of course. You are scientists. I think we learned that as well. You also worked in the mining, environmental protection. You're also a lecturer. You didn't tell us much about this one now, but I also learned you are a lecturer, and I have some question regarding this one as well for you. But since we are at CIMMYT and we also engage in science, I would like to start with some questions on your role in science, especially as your role as a women scientist. So generally, I think you told us you did a degree, an integrated degree, which consisted of different disciplines, let's say. And I think there has been probably, if you look at the past, I don't know, 20, 30 years, probably there was a lot of progress in a bit of balancing the gender imbalances. I think a lot of disciplines now we see a more equal representation of men and women. But I think in other particular disciplines, this imbalance can still be quite high. And you told us that the domains your integrated degree consisted of, and I would guess in some of these domains also men would tend to dominate. I don't have numbers, but I guess there could be easily 90+% men. So I would be interested, were you intimidated by this? Was this a conscious choice of yours? I want to follow this integrated degree, or did you say, okay, but this one or two disciplines I'm a bit more worried about, or I'm not really know if how well do I fit in there? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't shy away from them. So growing up in the ranching community, that's also moderately male dominated in terms of the culture of it. I remember when I got that first job, and the first consulting with the consulting company after wrapping that Christmas package, I went into the office to prepare, not knowing what it was going to be like when I got on the ground in South America, in Chile. And one of the women engineers, I still to this day remember, she was giving, they sent me to her to sit down and get advice. And so her advice consisted with, when in doubt, just try to make yourself look bigger. So she told me, I buy the biggest, puffiest jacket I can find, and I wear it, and I make sure I stand up tall as big as I can, and I use a deep voice to talk to them. And that was the pep talk I got going to South America, where I would spend, the next 5 years basically in literally a completely male environment. What I found and what I learned, especially in the environmental management role, was it was about talking to people again. Like in some ways, this research process began there. As the environmental manager for a copper mine, it was seen as such a weird role because it was unique. It was a new kind of a thing in Chile at the time. And so people would say, like, what's a gerente de medio ambiente, what is this thing? Like, how do you have one of these in a mine site? And so I had to figure out how to explain to people what my role was as well. And I remember in some ways I started probing because every different manager, there were 8,000 people on this mine site. So it was like a small city. I was in charge of making sure that all the, the food, we had a composting system. I had to make sure the food was properly managed. We had toxic materials. We had acid that was coming in by train. We had sewage and potable water treatment that we had to maintain all of the connections to. And we had logistics that were global. And so every one of those groups had personalities, and they were men that I had to interact with. And what I found, I started, it was an hour between Kalama, the city where we lived, and the mine site. And so I started taking turns riding in the truck with one of the managers up to the mine and then riding down. So I would commute with each of the different managers to find out, to get to know them better, because it was the first year, it was a disaster. I was in fights with people all the time. It was constant battles. I had people, so they had a nickname for me. They called me Green Pierce because my last name is Peace, so Greenpeace and Green Pierce. One of the guys in one of the meetings said, "Are you calling me an eco-terrorist?" And I was like, "No, I just need you to take care of the water." And so it was this constant battle all the time. And it was wearing me down, and it made my role an unhappy role to be in. So I started driving up and down with them. And one thing I learned for from my perspective as a young woman, we all needed to be friends. We all needed to be friendly, and we always needed to treat each other nicely. And we would have these big battles, and I would come back to work the next day and I would still be mad. But the men that I worked with would shed that anger, and I couldn't figure out how they were doing it. So I started commuting to understand their stories, get to learn about their families, learn about where they were from, and start to learn about why they were motivated to be in this most remote location, working under kind of hardship conditions. We got hardship pay because it was really a difficult place to work. It was Chilenos working with Canadian and US workers. So we had these culture differences all the time. And we had people, the mining industry is very multinational. So we had we had Europeans, and we just, people from around the world. We would have people from the Congo would come in because they had special expertise. So we always had to adapt. And what I started to do was I realized if I went and got beers at the happy hour at the end of the day with the guys, I could shed all that anger too. And I could be mad at you during the day and disagree with how you were doing something on the mine site, but I could still talk with you over a beer at night and chat and connect. And that turned out to be a real watershed moment for me when I realized, like, oh, I don't have to stay mad. I can let it go. Work stays at work. And somehow that compartmentalization seemed to come more easily to my male counterparts than it did for me. So once I figured that out, it was much better. And then the other thing was riding up and down and learning their stories, because then I could figure out how to connect with them. So I knew, the guy who said, "Are you calling me an eco-terrorist?" I rode up with him, and I learned that he took a lot of pride in his job. He did a lot of logistics, and he really took pride in doing it well and doing it efficiently. So if I could pose the problems in terms of efficiency and getting good materials that weren't going to break down, that weren't going to create leaks, that would protect our installation, he was on board with me as a teammate. And so that it was that, like, adjusting my own attitude and perspective that really helped me. So I didn't shy away, but I also didn't purposely pursue hostile environments, if you will. I wound up in a lot of places that would be considered hostile, but somehow they were fine. I will say this too. I loved working in South America. I felt like on a day-by-day basis, it was easier as a woman to gain respect. If I showed up as my authentic self, people in South America were very likely to meet me as their authentic selves too. And sometimes I worked in the national laboratory system here in the US, for example, and sometimes I would show up with my authentic self in that US national lab research environment and felt like I couldn't, every day was a new day. I never could gain equal respect. I never felt like I could get over the hump. It feels sometimes like culturally I have to always reprove myself every day. Whereas in South America, my South American experience, I felt like once I achieved respect with someone and a relationship with someone, I didn't have to reprove myself. They knew me and I knew them, and we had a level of trust. And sometimes that cultural difference here in my own country is a challenge that I still feel all the time in my current career.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, I can imagine that it was a challenging time because on the one hand, if you're the only woman among hundreds or more than thousands of men, then on top you come from a foreign country, and then on top of that you do something that is quite new for the people, like that changes a bit or challenges the way they do things. I guess there is potential for a lot of resistance. I can totally understand that. Yeah, maybe I could ask you something about, because you're also a lecturer at the Jackson School of Geosciences. So now you're not a student anymore. You're also a lecturer, a teacher, a mentor. And I was wondering if you compare the students from this generation that you are teaching to the times back then when you were a student. Is it generally more mixed now? Are there more women engaged now, interested now? Do you have problems in this way, or do you need to apply particular strategies that you try to engage women or underrepresented groups that you would want to come and study? It's one question, and maybe the other more personal question, if you don't mind. Um, what would you like your students to remember you? Because usually, you go out, you had a teacher, a professor, whatever, something, usually, at least from the most memorable ones, something stands out beyond the things that they teach you. But is there something you would like your students to remember you for? Thank
Oh,
you.
that's a hard question. So to the first question, I teach in the Energy and Earth Resources program, which is an integrated program. And so what we see is that we have a large number of female candidates that naturally gravitate to that program. So we are fortunate in that. We do have to recruit, and for many years, I worked with the graduate administrator to provide additional scholarships, to find funding for underrepresented candidates and female candidates to come into our program. So I have seen over the years it feels as if it has equalized. I'm not sure what the geoscience numbers are, so I am still embedded in that geoscience school, but we are a cross school program, so we pull from engineering and natural sciences, and we've got a real integrated group and a very international group as well. So over the years, it has been easier to identify promising candidates that are interested. We always have really high level candidates. We have many of the equivalent programs to our master's program that I work in are course based only, but our program is a research program. So people kind of devise, like I did, their own research process, their own research trajectory, and then they have the entirety of our university to go out and pull the classes in to fulfill the degree requirements, but get the training that they've customized for themselves. So the challenge for them is this convergence and synthesis of knowledge that they've got to do very quickly in about 2 years. So generally, one of the bigger delineators that I see is I don't like to accept students into my group unless they've worked in the real world for a few years, because there's an ability to synthesize and think about the application of information that comes from living in a corporate reality or in a field-based reality, but working in the world, so that when you come back to your academic and intellectual pursuits, you have something to ground it in, and you can anchor yourself to that. So almost less important to me is someone's gender identity than their work identity. and thinking through the many perspectives. So what I do see is that when we interview candidates, I tend to gravitate to the people who have had a rich, often not a straight line path. They seem to do better and perform better in our program because it is such a self-directed program. And I do think that we're seeing more and more women coming into our program all the time and applying all the time. In terms of what do I want to be remembered for, my favorite compliment that I got was from a student who took my class. My class teaches end-to-end decision support. So I teach them about dialogue, I teach them about deliberation, and then I teach them how to identify a community place-based problem that needs to be addressed, and how to gather data and information from people and from other sources, more quantitative sources. Then we build usually it's a systems dynamics model just to teach them modeling concepts. They build a model and then they convert that model into a multiplayer game. And then their final exam is they have to facilitate a dialogue with another group of students who role play their stakeholders. And they have to facilitate with their model the dialogue to see if they can't get that group to go through a process and make a decision. And so it's for the scientists and engineers that come into that room, they get really frustrated because I don't start with the quantitative data and information, and I don't start with the technology. They may have shown up for that, but I start with the softer skills and emphasize that from the beginning. And so I've had people say this class doesn't make any sense. And I've noticed that it's oftentimes the people who haven't worked in the real world, because in that class, what I'm trying to teach them is how to be agents of change. So when you feel the friction, when you feel that the guy who does the logistics for the warehouse isn't hearing your message, how do you back up and figure out, oh, you need to hear the message as efficiency. Oh, I need to go have a beer with you and talk so you and I can like be friends and talk about things on a lower, less tense level. Like you need to back up and figure out how to work within the system. So it's like looking at it through that systems lens, both to define the data and information about it, but also to identify the points where you can make a change. So the student, and the compliment that I value the most was a student who it's a small class. You can, yeah, he turned out, he was my student too. He was studying with me, and he wrote in the review of this class that he didn't like it at all. He really blasted me, thought it was terrible. And I just it was the second year, I think, that I taught the class. And I kind of took that in. It was very personal, but I thought, okay, I ought to do better. And I went back at it, and the course won lots of awards a couple of years after that, but I had to practice. But that same student graduated, went out and got a job in the real world, and reached back out and contacted me a couple of years after he'd been in the real world and said, now I understand. I understand what you were teaching me, and the information I learned in your course has been some of the most valuable information I have used on my job daily. That to me, if I can change someone's perspective enough to see themselves differently in the world and see their own role differently, that is awesome. That's what I hope. I hope if someone takes my classes, it helps them see themselves differently in the world and to see their own capacity to make change differently.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. No, I think this is really one of the greatest achievements, right? If you feel or someone acknowledges that you have made a big impact. And so I think that's all you can ask for as a lecturer, the maximum achievement. Yeah, I hope it was more than, probably it has been more than only this particular person. Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe, but this, he expressed it explicitly. He came back to you, right? Other people, they just they don't do that. Yeah, I think we have about 5 more minutes, so maybe a last question. Of course, the classical question about work-life balance, which like can be struggle for, or maybe work family balance, I would say. I think definitely for women it is tougher to, especially if you have particular aspirations, if you dream about achieving certain things. So can you maybe share some stories or maybe shortly something with us? How did you manage to navigate this potential tension, friction? And would you have any advice for women, maybe for younger women who start their career? Yeah, how can they be, how can they have maybe be happy in both domains, the personal domain and also the work domain? I think some people, they put more emphasis, or if they put a lot of emphasis here, they feel they are lacking something there, or they put too much emphasis on their work, and then they may at some point realize, oh, my personal life really suffered from this one, and they may regret that as well. So any advice you would have, maybe not only for women, also for all of us, how to balance this potential friction that there is.
Yeah, I agree. It's for everybody. So my husband, my partner, and I, we share a lot of the household duties, and the parenting duties as well. My children are now grown. They're both in college. Our youngest just finished his first year of college, and our oldest has one more year before she graduates from university. So we are just stepping into the empty nest period of our lives where I'm reconnecting with hobbies and reconnecting with fun. My life has been a constant balancing act. I would say one thing, I felt more nervous when I was younger about achieving my name, getting my recognition, which was really challenging and added probably some unnecessary aspects to daily life with young children. So I would say it's not a race to the finish. It's okay to take a more winding path and slow yourself down, because society wants to drive us and wants us to constantly kind of consume for success, right? Consume for awards, publications, push to get the next raise. I did a lot of that even when our children were very young. And luckily, my husband stepped back from his career on multiple occasions, and he would be the stay-at-home parent, so I could push forward and do what I thought was going to be more valuable for my career. Looking back, it's very easy now for me to see that I would have been successful in my own way if I had slowed down a little bit, and I could have removed some of the day-to-day friction if I hadn't felt that kind of compulsive need to live up to societal expectations. So in the end, my career has taken a really unique path that only I could have followed step to step. I had to follow the intuitive next steps. And I think that there are always opportunities to contribute, and that's where the joy comes, is from knowing that you're contributing. So having kids has been one of the joys of our lives. Our kids are just the best. They're so much fun. I really love having adult children. They're really awesome, and they're intelligent and curious about the world around them, and it's really neat to see them finding their own paths. And along the way, we took advantage. So we would always try to find those win-win opportunities. So I received a Fulbright award, and so we went and lived in Chile for about 3 months with my family. And so my kids have early memories of being in South America in what I view as like my second home. I received a Water Resource International Award and a fellowship, and went to Australian National University and was in Australia working for their groundwater management program at Australian National University as part of that team. And I loved it. And my kids got to go to Australia and live there. So they understood at a very early age that there's a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere. I love that they're aware of it. Their grandmother was Dutch, so now they're dual U.S. European citizens, and so they're kind of thanks to the juxtaposition of my career and my family and the fact that my career in academia allowed me to take them with me, means they have a broader perspective on what is the world and what is the world made up of, and what are the different ways that people can live. With that being said, there was a lot of stress, and many times that I would take them up to campus and build, tents for them while I tried to write in my office, which was really not a great balance of time. I should have just stayed home and focused on being home with them and tried to write. I did a lot of not sleeping at night because I could write from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. because kids were asleep and it was quiet and the house was, a space I could actually think in. I would recommend hiring people if you can, if you're in the lucky position to be able to offload anything or package up food, to like anything you can do to lighten your load on a day-to-day basis in ways that doesn't, break your bank account. You don't have to do everything. So find other people to help you do the things. And we didn't live near family. I wish we had, where we could have split some time, but we did get friends and we shared a lot of the child checking and keeping. We would take turns taking care of groups of kids that were all friends. And so, find ways to optimize that and recognize you don't have to do it all. You can get help from others.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan. I think it was very interesting, a very genuine answers and also presentation. I thank you very much. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think I have to pass back over to Isabel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael, for having this exciting conversation with Suzanne Pierce. On behalf of Dr. Brian Govers, Director General of CIMMYT, we thank Suzanne Pierce so much for sharing with us your outstanding professional and personal journey. Thank you for being a catalyst of change. Also, we thank the audience that joined today, and we invite you to the following Catalyst of Change, Advancing Equity and Inclusion in Science seminar in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.